Please welcome Mayor of Miami Beach, Dan Gelber, and Aspen Institute President and CEO, Dan Porterfield.
All right, so I'm Dan Gelber. It's my privilege to be the mayor of Miami Beach, but it's really my privilege to welcome you, I'm gonna get this right, to the second annual welcome to the second annual Aspen Ideas Climate Miami Beach. It sounds great, doesn't it? You know, my city is, look, I've never known another hometown in my whole life. I've only been here. But I've watched my city become the center of the world for moments in time, for just a brief episode in some interest group's life. So when Art Basel comes here, we are the center of the art world for 3 days. When the South Beach Food and Wine Festival is here, we are the center of the foodie world for about 3 days. When the Super Bowl is here, we're the center of the football, American football world for a little longer than about a week, but it's not much longer than that. And it felt like for a moment that we would be the center of the climate activism world for 3 days, but the truth is that's not the case at all. Because in my city, and I think in many cities, this is not a 3-day challenge. This is an everyday challenge, every day, every week, every month of every year. And that is why I am so proud that all of you are coming here to my city to talk about this challenge and to help solve this challenge. I can tell you that my city is ground zero in many ways, but I think many cities feel like that. But we certainly have an argument to make. I am the mayor of a 7.5-mile barrier island built on porous limestone sitting at sea level. We do not debate whether the waters are rising. We try to raise ourselves above the rising waters. We have raised our streets. We're changing our water systems. We're changing our building codes. We're doing all the things we think. But let me tell you what's most important. We want to get this right. Like so many cities in the world, we want to get this right because we can't afford to get it wrong. And that is why I could not be prouder to have the Aspen Institute here hosting this incredibly important convergence of doers and thinkers right here. And I just want to first thank Dan Porterfield and all of the Aspen staff for everything they're doing in my city to make this an incredibly important conference. You know, 2,500 plus people are attending this. There are over 300 speakers. There are over 50 different sessions. There are 250 young leaders that spent the weekend doing their thing. There are over 100 members of the international media here. This is an international conference, and it's going to happen every single year, which is so exciting. But I want to take a moment to just thank the folks that helped make this possible. First, of course, I do feel like we were talking about this, like this is like Dan and Dan's excellent adventure. Some of you don't know what I'm talking about, but many of you do. Thank you, everybody over 60. But it really does feel that way. You know, a couple residents said to me about 2 years ago, it must have been, why don't you reach out to the Aspen? Do you know anybody from Aspen? And I said, yeah, I used to play basketball with the current head of the Aspen Institute. And I always say the same thing. He was a very good passer, and I was a very prolific shooter. He will then now come up and tell you that he was a good rebounder because while I shot a lot, it didn't go in as often. But the truth of the matter is, I really appreciated Dan Porterfield in so many ways. I've watched his career since I first met him 30 years ago, and he really is an incredible resource to our nation and the world. And what he and the Aspen Institute is doing is phenomenal. Our other title sponsors are so grateful to have them. The Knight Foundation is democratizing this event. What they wanted us to do was make sure the whole world could hear, see, and participate in it, and that's what's happening. You know, the Related Group has been so helpful for us, and the Perez Family Foundation as well, and all the sponsors that you're going to see. Thank them. I don't know, buy their goods, do whatever, but they're really helpful. I also want to take a moment to thank someone who you don't really need to clap for because I'm tired of clapping for her. But my chief of staff, Michelle Berger, every time, has really put this on her shoulders in so many ways in addition to her day job, and I really am grateful. I think it was Lucille Ball who said, if you want something done, hire a busy woman, and I think Michelle really typifies that. I also want to thank all of our city staff who are here under the direction of our wonderful city manager, Alina Hudak. You'll see them throughout this week. They really work very hard. So with that, let me introduce my friend and teammate, Dan Porterfield.
Well, thank you, Mayor Gelber. Who would have known when I was chasing you up and down the court 30 years ago that I'd be calling you Mayor Gelber? But he is a shooter and a scorer and a winner. And your entire team, led by Michelle, has really been exemplary as public servants. They are in this struggle for all people all across the planet. And that's why they asked us to come here, so that we could showcase important work being done, raise the next set of critical questions and solutions in the spirit of generosity and public service that you and Michelle, that the team here in New World, all across Miami Beach demonstrate is unbelievable. Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you. And maybe he'll take it easy on me next time we go up and down the court with, So let me also say I bring greetings from our board chair, Margot Pritzker, who is here today. Margot, thank you for all you do for the Aspen Institute. And please join me in thanking a few other partners. One is the mayors of Miami-Dade County, Danielle Levine Cava, and Mayor Francis Suarez from City of Miami, who partnered with Dan to conceive of this last year. Thank you to them and their staffs. Thank you to our remarkable Aspen Institute teams, led by Greg Gershuni, Kitty Boone, and Elliot Gerson. And thank you to those visionary sponsors and our title partners, especially the Knight Foundation, the Related Group, the George M. Perez Family Foundation, as well as Stuart Miller and Lennar Foundation. Thank all of them on behalf of the Aspen Institute. So it is so inspiring to be back in Miami Beach. We love it here. This region is a multicultural mecca and a beacon of innovation. It is an opportunity crossroads. Thank you for welcoming us, and thank you for being here. I must begin tonight, though, on a note of sadness as we recognize the absence of one of our beloved Aspen Institute colleagues, Melanie Diaz. She passed away in February, suddenly, at the age of 25. A recent graduate of Georgetown University and a proud South Floridian, Melanie was a core member of our energy and environment team, and she was one of the lead planners of last year's convening and of this year's convening. And to quote one of her colleagues, Melanie was a truly kind, thoughtful, and caring human being. She took care of her coworkers and friends. She put others first. She'd go out of her way to comfort others during stressful or difficult times. Melanie was an extraordinary young leader, remarkable and exemplary of a generation. She was a passionate champion of the environment. We would now like to honor her with a moment of remembrance. Thank you. Melanie's mother, father, and brother are here with us this evening. Please join me in showing our support. Melanie was so proud to work with us at the Aspen Institute. We are a global nonprofit whose purpose is to ignite human potential to build understanding and new possibilities. We envision free, just, and equitable societies, and we work towards that vision by bringing together a broad spectrum of people for smart, open, informed, inclusive, and engaging dialogues that lead to learning and to solutions. Aspen Ideas Climate 2.0 reflects this approach. It is firmly fact-based and solutions-oriented, highlighting research, community wisdom, energy innovations, and change-making across the board, bringing together builders and doers and thinkers from every sector. About 200 plus who are here are young future leaders who chose to spend their spring break down here working on these topics. Let's hear it for the future. Last year's inaugural summit really did ignite human potential. To cite just one example, 2 entrepreneurs who spoke last year received a $2.5 million investment from another attendee right after this convening. This evening, one of our 2022 future leaders will tell you about how being here last year helped her take her work to the next level. What makes this a truly novel summit is that because of your diversity, we'll work on solutions from an enormous array of perspectives. And that's essential because the climate and energy questions before us are deeply complex and cannot be solved overnight. For example, the questions: how can we best protect human health and vulnerable communities from worsening heat waves, from rising floodwaters, from increasingly virulent weather patterns? How can we best stimulate new research, technologies, and innovations in carbon reduction, going for speed and for scale? How can we best make sure that the recent landmark American investments in infrastructure and technology, when implemented, are climate smart and community responsive? How can we best build public dialogue on these issues in a way that brings people together rather than hardening existing divides? These are just some of the future-focused topics we'll be discussing here, and not just on the main stage, but also in the many breakout sessions where we'll all have a chance to fire up the synapses of our 2,500-person brain towards solutions. As you take part, I really want to encourage you to join sessions on topics you may know absolutely nothing about, because finding and implementing solutions that will work across the years and across the decades is going to require continuous learning and open-mindedness, with a commitment not just to limiting the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is essential, but even more than that, to preserving the cultures, communities, and environments of this planet so that unborn generations can experience the same richness of life that we who are here today all want for our own children and our loved ones. This is our moment. Thank you for being here. Now, back to you, Dan. That's beautiful.
I'm so excited to have you all here celebrating spring break with us. Tonight is going to be very exciting, and I'm just going to tell you who you're going to hear from tonight. And I love the way you all put together these panels. They're always so interesting, and they do fire up the synapses. So you're going to hear tonight from John Curtis, who is a Republican congressman who is the leader of the Conservative Climate Caucus, who will join Energy CEO Diane Leopold to address crucial technologies and how to get Congress on the same page. So we're going to get Congress on the same page tonight. You're going to hear a chemist who makes the case for 3D printing as a tool, a waste reduction tool. You're going to hear a meteorologist explore how scientific insight might lead to public action. You're going to hear from renowned rock climber Tommy Caldwell, who will share how athletes can be activists and top climate investors. And of course, you're going to hear from Tom Starr tonight, who's going to tell us what's on his priority list. So just tonight, that's what you're getting. But first, please join me in welcoming our friend, Roel Maas, from the Knight Foundation.
Good evening, everyone. It is such a pleasure to welcome you all to Miami, the 305, and perhaps most importantly, my hometown. I'm Raul Moaz, and I have the privilege of serving as Knight Foundation's Senior Director for Community and National Initiatives here in Miami, Florida. I want to welcome you all here and the thousands that are joining us online today and throughout the week. From the very first Americans who settled on the banks of the Miami rivers to the countless diasporas who have remade Miami in the past 7 decades, this city has been and remains a place of refuge, a place of opportunity, and promise for absolutely millions of people. Miami is defined by folks who seek to better themselves and their communities, and that often means taking the harder path of getting back up when life knocks you down time after time. In short, Miamians, we're a resilient bunch. The Knight brothers ran their newspaper business, which at that time was the largest in the country, out of Miami. And today, Knight Foundation, also headquartered here, carries on with the idea that informed and engaged communities are absolutely essential to an effective and healthy democracy. So it's no secret and it makes total sense that when you combine these things, a city facing incredible challenges from a changing climate, a community whose ethos is anchored on resilience, and a foundation who believes that participatory, inclusive, and equitable communities are absolutely critical to our success and our prosperity, that we all come together to welcome Aspen Ideas Climate to Miami. And for that, I am so grateful to the Aspen team, to Mayor Gelber, to Michelle, and all those who have made tonight possible and this week possible. As much as responding effectively to climate issues will require really novel technical and economic solutions, it's going to be just as important and just as difficult to change minds. We not only need good policies, great leaders, and sound solutions, but we need all those things to come from and be developed with and adopted by the people of this place and all places around the world. Miami is just the city to do this week and every week of the year from now on. I'm so looking forward to what we all develop together. Let's get to it. Thank you so much.
And now, Bernadette Plackey with Ed Williams.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to be here in Miami. Let me set this up, Bernadette, and then we'll get into it. I think we have a 15-minute slot ahead of us. So look, extreme weather events are occurring with increasing frequency. We all know that. Storms, floods, heat waves, deadly fires in places like California or in the southern Mediterranean. And it's in this context that the role of the meteorologist to sound the alarm, to help prepare people for these events has become sometimes a matter of life and death. But beyond extreme weather reporting, meteorologists have an important role as educators on climate action. They're some of our most trusted experts, the likes of which we really need when it comes to building awareness and understanding of the climate emergency. So it's a massive privilege to be in conversation with one of those trusted experts, a great friend of mine, Bernadette Plackey. Now, she is an award-winning meteorologist. She's director of Climate Central's Climate Matters. This is a program that offers data analysis, graphics, and other reporting resources to a growing network of more than 3,000 local TV meteorologists and journalists to help them tell climate stories. She develops partnerships with media organizations, with nonprofits, with academic institutions, and she serves as an expert on the evidential link between our changing climate and extreme weather events. Now, before Climate Central, she worked for a decade as an on-air meteorologist in Arkansas, in Kentucky, in Maryland, and her ability to understand all the complexity of the world, but then to cut through with storytelling is really remarkable. Bernadette, thank you for being here. Just let's start at the beginning. What was your journey from on-air meteorologist to climate emergency educator?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and thanks to all of you for being here for this really important subject. My journey, it's interesting, when I was in it, I don't think it was as obvious, but reflecting back on this question, when you're a meteorologist, you do love the weather. You get really into storms, but you quickly see what that's going to do. You see how it impacts lives and livelihoods. And so you have this drive really to keep people safe and prepared. It's a big part of being a meteorologist. And when I was in that, you see the bigger changes on bigger scales and bigger storms and the compounding effect of that. So that was really part of my progression getting into climate change, is still that drive to keep people safe and prepared.
And tell me, what have you seen then over your career? Just describe the kind of weather patterns that you were first reporting on as a meteorologist and then what we see today. Just give us that kind of span, if you like.
So our heat waves are getting more intense and they're lasting longer, and our water cycle is being supercharged. It's evaporating more water into the atmosphere when it gets hotter, so the drier areas are drying out even more, and then you've got more moisture, so when it does come down in the form of a storm, there's more rain to come down. On top of that, with our sea levels rising, we're seeing simple sunny day coastal flooding creeping up and up and up more. And then when it's combined with a landfalling tropical system, which are intensifying more rapidly, they're coming with a higher, more deadly storm surge and more rain.
What you've done, if I could say, Bernadette, in that answer is so brilliant, because you've just described something incredibly complicated in literally kind of 45 seconds. And what you've also done so brilliantly that meteorologists do is use your hands as well. I mean, I don't know if there's is there a special...
You can't keep them down.
Is there a school you go to that, I mean, it's really
the
amazing.
wall, you need the walls.
So talk to me a bit about public opinion. How has public opinion moved in respect to the climate crisis?
Public opinion has really shifted. And first of all, we'll talk US here.
Yeah, please.
Because global is a very different conversation. But in the US, it has moved dramatically, I'd say, over the past 5 to 10 years compared to where it was even. However, there's a huge misperception on where people are on this subject.
Right.
We learned a little bit more about this with another speaker who's going to be here, Tony Leiserowitz, and he really broke down the American public into 6 categories through all of his research. And the dismissive group is the one that you're not going to reach. It's less than 10% of the population, but they're so loud that they have an outsized voice in the conversation, and it quiets a lot of general conversation on climate change. So people are afraid to go there with the subject because they think it's more divided than it actually is.
And are they still, that group is the hardest group to reach still?
That is a group you're probably not getting to.
Right.
But it's less than 10% of the population. So if you focus on that, you're missing 90-some% of the population who has a lot of questions. They know something's happening, but they don't know what exactly and what they can do about it.
So what are the principles that you would use then to communicate to lay people, if you like, people who are not steeped in the science, they are not looking at the data in the way that you are? What kind of communications, techniques and principles do you use to get the story across?
The first thing is know your audience. This is the golden rule of communication, and it's gonna come up a lot, but there's a lot banked in there. It's topic, it's tone, it's timing, it's how you really resonate with someone. For example, a scientific conversation is going to be very different than a conversation I have with my grandmother. Second, you want to meet people where they are. There are so many things that actually connect us. We focus on the things that divide us, but there are things that really bring us together. And in those shared values, there's a commonality, because sadly, climate change is affecting almost everything at this point. So you can start on those shared values and understand from there. The other thing I always say, third, is personalize and localize. I mean, it's a global issue, but people don't connect necessarily with a polar bear or a global average temperature. They know it was 90 degrees outside here today in Miami, and that's hot. So really bring that down on the local personal level. The fourth thing is simplify. I mean, we have some amazing people here at this event who know a lot, but the rest of the world doesn't necessarily follow this the way we do, so break it down. And then the last I'd say is do not be afraid. And I can't stress that enough because there's some really complex subjects that have happened in this world that we don't run away from, but people run away from this one. Science is on your side, public opinion's on your side, engage.
And that's a really interesting point about public opinion because it has changed, right, over the last decade. I mean, you've made the point that those who deny that the planet is warming has got a smaller and smaller and smaller group, but it's also become quite political as well. Do you see that as a challenge in terms of communicating that you are trying to kind of work through what can be quite a politically challenging topic?
It's a challenging part of it, absolutely,
Yeah.
and it's, I mean, you can't ignore it. However, it doesn't have to be the full conversation.
Yeah.
There's so many other ways. I mean, we started with talking about weather. You can talk about how it's affecting health, how it's affecting your kids' camp. I mean, they're changing camp times and hours. Sports are being affected by this. Where you travel, what time of year you travel there. I mean, the simple things, but then the big things too. Our food systems, our water availability, all that's being affected. And I know policy is connected. I'm not ignoring that, but there's more to this conversation.
So talk to me a little bit about how you strike the right balance. I mean, we were at a session this afternoon, the media session, and we were looking at some data that demonstrated that there's high levels of anxiety around the climate. I think in the US, there's 64% of people would say they're either moderately afraid or are quite afraid or quite worried, I think was the adjective. And we've talked about tipping points. We were talking this afternoon about the Thwaites Glacier, that if it, or glacier as you would say in Europe, if it melts, the sea is going to rise by 11 meters?
11 feet.
Something, or 11 feet, right? I mean, devastating. How do you strike the right balance? Because we don't want to catastrophize, which then makes people feel like they have no agency, they can't do anything, but equally, we need to be realistic with people. So talk to me a bit about striking the right balance when it comes to climate communications.
And you're right, it's both.
Yeah.
Because there is going to be a lot of amazing conversation here about opportunities and solutions, and that is just as important part of the conversation. But we also can't ignore the seriousness. So I think it's okay to go there with the seriousness, but you can still bring it through to the build people's capacity to respond. What are the ways out of this? What are the responses? What are the solutions? And we're going to have a couple of days full of those here. So there's a lot of examples of that.
And people are looking for solutions, aren't they?
People
want agency in this fight.
People are concerned. They really are, and they want to be able to do something. They just don't always know what to do. There's, as much as we know about the actual science, there still is this enormous gap in our climate IQ with people who aren't dedicated to this subject all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes we lose people in that disconnect because those of us in our climate circles get really excited and go, go, go with our lingo and our terminology, and some people aren't following along. So there's still an ability to bring people along in that process to help them understand what can be done.
But presumably also don't dumb the storytelling down that it becomes meaningless, right?
No, and actually, I do not like dumbing it down, that phrase, because it takes a lot of skill to simplify.
Listen, I'm as a former television journalist myself, I know it's
to keep that robustness of the science.
It's one of the hardest skills, right?
Yes.
So look, I think we've got quite a lot of folk in from the private sector over the next few days in the room participating and speaking. What role do companies have as sources of trustworthy climate communications? What role for business?
You know, an enormous role. And this is where it's going to take all of us to really move forward. We have policy, we have communicators, and we have businesses. And businesses are implementing, and they have such a brand that they carry to the public. So there's really sort of two sides to it, that businesses are becoming more sustainable in their own operations, and we know a lot of people are going to be talking about that and doing some amazing work. But at the same time, I don't want people to forget that they have a megaphone to the public too. And to figure out creative ways to bring those simple climate facts that you think people know, but bring them out to the public so that people can build that agency, know what the solutions are, know a path forward.
And we know also that the relationship between the employer and the employee is one of the most trusted relationships, and information that companies impart to their own employees is trusted at a higher degree than some mass media. So there is a real role, actually, for businesses to communicate on this topic, right?
There absolutely is.
So maybe it's a bit of a personal question, but you are one of the most optimistic people I know. But what you see in the data and what you've seen over the span of your career is pretty grim, pretty frightening. How do you remain optimistic?
Well, I think, one, we should define the word optimism nowadays. It can unpack a lot there. Well, it's not an easy thing. I think it depends on the season, the month, how I would answer this question. But one of the ways I really look at it is we have to be. Yeah. Because this is one of those complex issues that it's not just right now, but it's also looking forward. Mm-hmm. And there was a time we were on a path to 5 or 6 degrees Celsius of warming, right?
Yeah.
We've brought that curve down. Not enough, though. And that's the thing. So it's a process, and we're in that process right now. And what I think that's really hard to communicate, because it's several things going on at once, and people just want one simple answer, is that our solutions are happening. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of really cool stuff happening. Our warming's happening faster. And we need to switch that path.
And you can see when, when you focus minds that you can make real difference. Look at Europe, right? The war in Ukraine, the terrible invasion of Ukraine, has forced European countries to completely rethink the energy mix. Germany has gone from 90% oil and gas coming from Russia to, I think, less than 10%. They brought 6 LNG terminals on in a year and filled up their gas storage. So we can do this. We can turn this around. We can flatten the temperature curve.
Bend the curve, right?
Bend the curve, right?
We need to bend the curve. And we saw this with COVID.
Yeah.
If we want to do something, we can. And this is a subject matter that we know the causes. We know the path forward. We need to accelerate and supersize those solutions. That's really been my theme of the year, is accelerate and supersize. We have to do more, and we have to do it faster.
So last question, because we're in the final minute of this speed conversation. The role of meteorologists, it's going to become more important as we move through this period of really driving mitigation against the climate crisis?
I think meteorologists are super important, so yes. And the interesting thing is it's not just the impacts, but weather is one of our solutions. Wind and solar. This is weather forecasting. So yes, it's going to play a part going forward.
So last question, visuals are really important, right? They're important when you tell stories, whether you're a journalist, whether you're a meteorologist, if you're in the storytelling business. Tell me about the visual that you're wearing and why it's important.
Okay, so I'm very excited. Some of you probably know this, but those who don't, these are the Ed Hawkins warming stripes, and every line is a global temperature anomaly. So you start on this side. This is going back to 1850, and you see how the world has warmed in that time. So if you go on showyourstripes.info or #showyourstripes, Ed Hawkins did a lot of really cool stuff with these stripes designs.
Bernadette, you are absolute inspiration to me, and I hope you're an inspiration to the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please welcome Joe DeSimone.
Thank you. It's really great to be here. You know, the methods for making things in society have their roots in technologies and capabilities that were frankly figured out centuries and arguably millennia ago. Take, for example, molding products. This was invented a long time ago, and when you think about making things today in our manufacturing economy, the world's manufacturing economy is about $12 trillion, and polymers represents about 1.1 trillion of that, and 30% of that's injection molded. And that's using a technology that's been around for a long time. These tools become increasingly complicated to make sophisticated products. It often takes a long time to actually get your hands on these molds. It's not uncommon for them to cost $1 million. make 8 parts for like an electrical connector, and once you have them, you don't want to make changes. And again, this is a big part of the economy, and what's fascinating is because of the nature of molding, the complexity of the process and the tooling, it actually stifles innovation, because once you've invested all that time and money, you don't want to make those changes. You got to reap the ROI on that. The products, because of the challenges of molding, are not as dematerialized as they could be. They're not as lightweight and as strong as they could be. The materials are actually better than the molding processes. And it has triggered cumbersome and energy-intensive supply chains, and there's almost no recycling. Thinking about supply chains, I love this quote from Thomas Friedman: on any given day, 2% of the world's GDP can be found in transit in some way. And that reinforces the global supply chains of shipping products over long distances. And not only shipping products, because of the challenges of making things, we have ballooned up warehouses full of products that are often climate-controlled warehouses around the globe that are actually tying up billions and billions of dollars of capital, just waiting for these products to be consumed or needed, as opposed to being just-in-time manufacturing and the opportunities for a warehouse in the cloud on demand. So people have been talking about 3D printing for a long time because it can make these dematerialized products. They can be lightweighted, they can be personalized. The challenge is that historically the way 3D printing has been practiced, you could argue it's actually 2D printing over and over again. There are mushrooms that grow faster than most 3D printed parts. Because of the layer-by-layer approaches, there's a orientation dependence on properties that makes it really challenging to use a lot of these products. The layers and particles are typically not well fused, and the material choices have been incapable of making final parts. A long time ago, we were inspired by Hollywood. And as a chemist and working with physicists and others, we were wondering, why can't 3D printing look more like this? Where objects can grow out of a puddle in almost real time to have amazing performance characteristics. Now, that's a long shot to be thinking about, but we invented a process that we reported in Science back in 2015 that is actually a breakthrough in how one uses and develops 3D printing. It's a breakthrough in material science related to this window at the bottom of this reservoir that's not only optically transparent, but it's permeable to oxygen. And so what happens is when you lower a platform, the build stage, into this reservoir of liquid, it gets very close to the window, and then we start projecting light. And where the light hits, it cures the resin. But here's the catch. The part will bond to the platform, and it lifts the part out, but it doesn't bond to the window because the oxygen's also coming through, and the oxygen inhibits the chemistry right at the window. And what this means is that we can start setting patterns of light that would be impossible to mold an object. And as the part is elevated, it's drawing resin in underneath it rapidly. And this allows a 3D printer to operate 100 to 1,000 times faster than a traditional 3D printer. And this opens up the opportunity for now making things with light. And we study this process in great detail. This is an image called optical coherence tomography. It's kind of like ultrasound imaging. And what you can see is this gap between the growing part and the window that's created by this oxygen that's also coming through the window as the light penetrates further and cures the part and creates this object. I think of this process as a software-controlled chemical reaction to grow parts. And every step of the process we have complete control over. And we now converted this capability into a commercial printer. These are the printers, different build areas, different sizes, different capabilities. And then you can start stringing together these printers into a beginning of a factory-like setting. And the factories can get larger and larger. You can start stringing together the printers. And now you have a capability of giving people a manufacturing tool set that can do amazing things. And here's a video.
We salute all those who believe good enough is never good or enough. Those who pursue excellence for themselves and for our planet. At Carbon, we apply our craft using science and technology to push limits and realize products unmatched in performance. Our difference is one you feel, and it is light years ahead of anything else out there. You feel it in running shoes that control energy with every stride. Saddles that enhance your performance and comfort mile after mile. Helmets that increase your protection every time you take the field. Clear aligners and dentures that improve oral health and give you more than a few reasons to smile. Crafted by Carbon is a promise. It stands for dedication and focus to crafting what you and our planet truly need. Ongoing creation of amazing answers to our toughest questions. We salute the leaders, dreamers, and doers who keep creation in motion, who boldly imagine a brighter future and craft it every day.
So this technology has now been commercialized and extended into some large volume manufacturing, from running shoes to over 1 million people wearing their first 3D printed dentures. And it's just the beginning. And when we start looking at the different buckets of opportunities going forward, we still want the printers to go faster. We want to do multiple material printing. We're already using bio-based feedstocks. We've now figured out how to start recycling the resins, have the products turn back to liquid that can be reprinted. And the opportunities for doing high-resolution printing are quite clear. And this is a big direction where we're going to drive some new technologies. We always like to print the Eiffel Tower as an example. This is the Eiffel Tower printed on those commercial printers. But now my students and I at Stanford have built printers that increase the resolution, and we can make smaller and smaller objects. And if you can see that really small one right there, that's made with a printer with 1.5 micron resolution. So a red blood cell is 8 microns in diameter. And what we're able to do now is start combining these technologies, and we really want to focus on making things easily from 1 to 1,000 microns, which is a really hard spot to work on, including microneedles for delivering liquid and solid products into the skin, and new ways of sampling products from the skin. And so one of the areas that we want to do is, instead of focusing on blood for surveillance of people, we want to focus on the clear fluid in the skin, and where we can do it just with a simple patch and open up much more rapid measurements. The ability of combining these microneedles with biosensors, building on what continuous glucose monitoring is, but now looking for 15 molecules, not just glucose. And finally, new ways of delivering vaccines directly into the skin with the dry product that can be shelf stable and not need refrigeration over long distances. So we're very excited about the future and where this technology can go. And thank you for your attention.
Please welcome Congresswoman Federica Wilson.
Good evening, Aspen Ideas. I'm so excited to welcome you all to the community I am so proud to represent, Florida's 24th Congressional District. I'm honored to be here with amazing leaders like Miami Beach Mayor Dan Gelber, Miami-Dade County Mayor Daniela Levine Carver, and so many dedicated and passionate global leaders in the fight against climate change. As you know, Florida's coastal communities are on the front lines of the climate crisis. It is extreme. Each passing year, I see firsthand the devastating effects of climate change on our state and our communities, from extreme flooding to catastrophic hurricanes that seem to get stronger and stronger with each passing year. We've made progress across the country, and it is thanks to efforts and engagements of everyone here today, because we've made climate a central part of the national conversation, and that is so important. And everyone is trying to do their part. I'm proud to announce that I secured in Congress nearly $10 million in community project funding for Florida International's Robotics and Autonomous Systems Laboratory Coastal Conservation and Restoration Program. That's a mouthful. The goal is to provide the tools of tomorrow that address critical science questions concerning our coastal environment. This program is the future in environmental monitoring and restoration. Its use of autonomous robotics to monitor even the slightest environmental changes in places like Biscayne Bay is incredible. With this funding, FIU is poised to become the clearinghouse for environmental data to be shared across federal, state, and local governments and research partners all over the world. This will help us develop research opportunities for the next generation of scientists because the challenges we face are immense and they require a collective effort from all of us. So I stand as your Congresswoman committed to ensuring that South Florida is prepared to combat the climate crisis for as long as it takes. So let's work together to build a better future for our children in and beyond South Florida. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.
Please welcome Tommy Caldwell to the stage.
Yeah, I think we're gonna start with a little video. I think. There we go. I suddenly felt this confidence. I knew exactly how each finger was going on to each hold, where the little ripples on the rock were digging into my shoes. All right, so being in South Florida, we're about as far from rock climbing as you can possibly be. So I thought I'd start with a little video to give you context. But for those of you that don't know, what I do for a living is that. I live my life on the side of the biggest rock walls in the world, and I climb them. And so you might be wondering, what does this have to do with climate change activism? Turns out, a fair amount. You see, my sport is most often practiced in some of the most hard to get to places in the world, places that aren't really that touched by human hands. High elevation places, places way off the ground like this, like the side of El Capitan. Polar regions like this, sometimes I go to northern Alaska or Antarctica and climb. And then a little bit closer to home, sometimes in just the middle of our national parks, but this is in the bottom of the Grand Canyon on the first ascent of this really beautiful crack that I did about 10 years ago. And to be successful at my sport, you have to learn to notice everything, from the smallest to the biggest details. In fact, much of the time, our life actually depends on getting those details right. And when that's the case, you notice the change. And I think that's why these days, the outdoor community is really stepping up and becoming part of this climate change conversation. There's a lot of nonprofits like Protect Our Winners, the Access Fund, and the American Alpine Club. They're really stepping up, but there's also private sector people stepping up as well. But you know what? We've been telling the story of climate change for a lot of years, and honestly, I think we've been getting it wrong, but who can blame us? I mean, the problems in our sport are actually pretty real. This is a picture of El Capitan in 2012. El Cap's the wall that I was climbing at in the first video. Here it is 4 years later. That's a big change. Beetle kill has had, the drought has allowed beetles to move into Yosemite Valley and kill most of the pine trees. And then a little bit closer to home, this kind of stuff is happening. This is my home in Estes Park, Colorado, where a couple of years ago, the 2 biggest fires in Colorado history came in and surrounded our town and somehow didn't burn the whole town down. But also in the more remote places like this is one of my favorite mountains in the world. This is called Fitzroy. I actually named my son Fitz after this mountain. And this sits in the southern part of Argentina, and it's a place that I won't go anymore, basically, because the mountain, which has been frozen together for millennia, now has these super warm spells that come through. That's usually the best time to climb when it's warm. But every time it gets warm, some climber dies because of rockfall. But, you know, we talk about these problems, and we don't get a lot of traction. Turns out that's not how the brain works. People don't want to hear about problems, especially climbers. They want to know that their life is going to be radical or bitchin', as my friend Amy McNeely would say. They want to know that we're going to send the gnar, not plummet to our death. In all seriousness, if there is one thing climbers are all about, it's imagining improbable solutions and making them a reality. This guy right here, Yvon Chouinard, is one of my biggest heroes. I work for his company, Patagonia. And when he started Patagonia, I guess almost 50 years ago, he didn't realize how bad making clothing was for the environment. But he pretty quickly realized it was bad, and so he started to make changes. At first, it started small, things like organic cotton, regenerative agriculture, switching to recycled materials. But more recently, he's been making systematic change, things like starting 1% for the planet, or a platform called ActionWorks, where people can get connected with local nonprofits to donate money and get involved. And his biggest thing that he's done lately is he decided to give his $1.5 billion company away. Most billionaires, they take the money and run at some point. He decided to start a legal structure that would make sure that all the money went to environmental nonprofits, our planet, forever. That's a pretty cool idea. Enough about Yvon, though. I want to go back to talking about me. You might have noticed the kind of awkward lineup of people tonight. A lot of politicians, scientists, and then one random dirtbag climber guy. I think there's a reason I got invited here tonight, and that's because years ago, climbing was kind of this weird sport for nerds. But more recently, it's become kind of cool, weirdly. There's this whole genre of climbing films that you can go on Netflix and watch. And what that means is that people have started using us for branding in weird ways. Like when we do new climbs, sometimes the president will tweet about us. That's pretty weird. But you know what? I'll take it. It gives us the chance to get into the room. In 2017, I went to my first lobbying event in Washington, D.C. It was an event called Climb the Hill, and it was organized by the American Alpine Club and the Access Fund. And I had this kind of sleazy idea of politicians as just these kind of power-hungry mongers who were trying to take us down. But honestly, when I got in the halls of Congress and started to sit down with people, I realized that it wasn't that way. These are real people talking about real solutions. And I actually found it kind of fun to go and lobby. And so I go back now on occasion. I've gone back many times to advocate for issues like the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And I've gotten myself in some pretty cool situations. Like I found myself on Senator Schumer's porch one day with two of the best climbers in the world, Sausage Julian and Alex Honnold. I also had dinner with Senator Mike Lee once. That was kind of a trip. I've taken Senator Hickenlooper climbing, got him a couple way off the ground, shaking in his boots. Kind of wish that was Mike Lee, actually. Anyways. We don't, and one thing I've learned is when I go on these lobbying trips, we don't always agree on the means. But one thing we do agree on is that this country and this world is an incredible place, and we need to figure out how to protect it. And that gives me hope. And while I've had a great time in DC, I've learned that lawmakers do hold a lot of the cards, but ultimately, it's the voters that vote those people in to be. So we not only work from the top-down approach, going straight to the lawmakers, but these days the outdoor industry is really trying to come from the bottom up as well. So functionally, what does this mean for us now? A few years ago, I came across an idea in an environmental film about Tongass National Forest called ground truthing. And the idea comes from this premise that if we want to really love nature enough to protect it, we need to experience it in its rawest form. We need to get covered in it. We need to eat it. We need to climb the biggest mountains and look straight into the eyes of the wolves, like I did on this trip to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and let it overwhelm us. And if we do that, we'll have no chance but to no other option but to fall in love with it. And speaking of love, if there's one belief I want to install in my children, that's my daughter. I actually love her more than my robe. But if there's one belief I want to instill in her and my kids, it is that while my generation and my parents' generation might have left us in a terrible mess, they get the opportunity to fix it. They can be the superheroes that literally save humanity. What kid doesn't want to be a superhero? Thank you so much.
And now, Rania Harara.
Hello, everyone. I'm honored to speak today as a future leader, but also as an advocate for climate and gender justice. My name is Rania Harara, and I'm the co-founder of Moroccan Youth for Change. I attended the Future Leader Climate Program here at Aspen Institute last year, and I'm back today as an alumna. The Aspen Ideas Summit has been an incredible experience. It has given me renewed hope and inspiration for our collective fight against climate change. For too long, climate change has been disproportionately affecting marginalized communities, especially women and girls from the global south. That is why it's very important for us to remember that climate justice will only be achieved with gender equality. As I said in the discussions and the workshops at the summit, I felt a sense of urgency, but also responsibility to take action, because I could not sit by and watch the world around me suffer from the consequences of the devastating effects of climate change. So the summer following Aspen, I decided to take the lead in my community and organize environmental education camps that serve to educate Moroccan youths about climate change in Morocco, but also equip them with the tools to make an impact. Because education is key to create lasting change and sustainable future for all. But we cannot do this alone. So I'm urging you, policymakers and world leaders, to advocate for youth inclusion in these spaces and provide us with the funding to be part of the decision-making processes, because we have unique perspectives and energy that can drive change. Let us use the knowledge and the inspiration we gain from the summit to fuel our passion and our actions. Let us stand together in solidarity and fight for a just and sustainable world. Thank you.
Please welcome co-chair of Galvanized Climate Solutions, Tom Steyer, with CNBC's Matt Rossoff.
How's it going, everybody? Thanks for joining us, Tom. I want to start by talking about what happened to you that made you make this your life's work. What changed in your life, and when did it happen? Was there some sort of event or something that sort of catalyzed it?
So I come from a family that spends a lot of time in the outdoors and has for multiple generations. And one of the things I did was work in Alaska when I was in my early 20s, just for a summer. But I traveled all over the state, and I thought it was the closest that I could get as an American to what the United States looked like before Europeans showed up. And in 2006, I took my family there to see the exact same thing, to let them see how incredibly rich the land is, how incredibly exciting it is to see that kind of untouched America. And what we saw was that the exact same places that I'd seen in 1981 were melting so fast, so obviously, and in such huge size that it completely freaked me out. And I thought, wow, this thing that I totally love is definitely being destroyed. And what a great chance to throw a punch to try and stop that and try and preserve the thing that I care about, I thought my kids would care about, and that people in my family have cared about for a long time.
So you started in doing activism and talking about the issue, and then about a year and a half ago, you founded an investment company that specializes in climate. What happened in the business landscape between when you had that realization and last year that made you want to do this? What's changed?
Well, two things changed. It wasn't just the business landscape. I think we won the argument, basically, that climate change was happening, that it was critical that we respond to it, and that America needed to lead on this. And I think that as a result of that, we moved from what I thought of as the argument stage in America, like, do we have to do this, to, okay, we have to do this, how are we going to do it? And capitalism scales. Capitalism can take it fast, big, in a way that can change the world. And that's why I decided to do Galvanize as a company investing in climate solutions.
What do you think changed? Why do you think we won the argument? What happened? Is it enough people having that same experience? I mean, I know in the Bay Area after the Orange Day, everybody sort of freaked out. Suddenly everybody's
you know, the thing that we have on our side is the facts. And those facts show up all the time. You know, a friend of mine just went to New Zealand, I think 2 weeks ago, and New Zealand had said, a 1,000-year flood in New Zealand is 4 inches, so we should prepare for 4 inches. But they built the seawalls for 8 inches because, let's face it, the world is changing. We should be very careful. It was a 24-inch flood. The facts are coming in this world, whether it's New Zealand or Pakistan or California or Texas. The facts are coming in, and you can't, nobody wants to destroy the world.
So when you're investing in startups and young companies, what are you bullish on? What are you looking for, and what areas are you most interested in?
Well, let me say this. This is not just about startups.
Right.
I try and just break this down into what I think of as innovation, which is new ideas. And that you can break down into, you know, straightforwardly the 6 parts of response, which is, you know, transportation, electricity, agriculture, manufacturing, the built environment, and sequestration. I said that fast, but I'm just saying they're big verticals that you can focus on with results. But the other question is, in the near term, are we going to take the technologies we have and deploy them in a way that changes the trajectory of the natural world and for all of us going forward? So it's not just startups. It's a continuation of impact from the smallest companies to the biggest companies and the hugest projects.
There is definitely a growing criticism as a lot of tech investors have gotten into the space that they only want to bet on the big things, the fusions of the world, right? The sort of silver bullet solutions. What do you think about that criticism? I mean, there's the argument we already have everything that we need. All we need to do is deploy it.
Okay, so let's just take fusion as an example before I answer Matt's very good question. Yeah. There are 12 companies really trying hard to get nuclear fusion. And I think the people who are invested in it, I've been invested in nuclear fusion since 2006 personally. I think people who are optimistic about the huge impact that fusion can have believe that impact will show up in a significant way in 2040, just to put it in context. That is a very good outcome for the world. So when you think about what we're going to do in the interim, we cannot wait for nuclear fusion to save us. We need to deploy the existing technologies. But let me bring, and of course there's a whole bunch of other technologies that we're developing that are fantastic too. But let me just give you one idea. There's an old saying, if you want to manage it, you have to be able to measure it. And I always say to people, okay, my jacket. What's the carbon footprint of my jacket? Nobody knows. No one knows the carbon footprint of everything. So the first thing I'd say to you is, yeah, we have a whole bunch of gimmicks and solar panels and electric vehicles that change this, but where is the measurement so we have a strategy to change it? So if you're running a business, if you're running this building, you know your carbon footprint, so you can start to go like, man, this carbon footprint's way too big. We need to do the following 5 things. Until you can measure it, how the heck do you actually manage the transition?
But I look at sort of what's happened with carbon credits, and there's measurement, and then there's the sort of wink, wink, we'll sort of, maybe these measurements aren't precise, but it's good enough for us. How do you need some kind of, I don't know, government definition? Do you need an agreed upon standards body? How does that work?
I don't think there's any question that you need an agreed upon standards body. I mean, I'll just give you some numbers so that you can put it kind of in context. If you look at the European carbon credits, so that is a government-run credit system, they hit 100 euros per ton in February of 23 for the first time ever. If you look at the California carbon credit, in February they were around $26 and change per ton. So roughly a quarter of Europe. If you look at the voluntary carbon market, the so-called offset market, which is, I think, what Matt was referring to, where if you feel like, oh my gosh, I should offset my carbon emissions personally or as a company, the market right now is about $2 a ton. The implication, maybe those tons haven't been measured as carefully as they are in California or Europe. So of course, we need somebody verifying that it's a change, that it's permanent, that there's not a ton of leakage.
Are you invested in carbon capture? What do you think? Is that going to be necessary in this century?
So let me just, there's a difference between what I would describe as carbon capture and sequestration. So carbon capture is the idea that as you emit, you actually capture the CO2 emissions and then stick them in the ground, pipe them to someplace and stick them in the ground permanently. Most of this is actually used, to the extent the CO2 is used, it's for enhanced oil recovery. I think 60% of CO2 emissions that are recovered and used are used for enhanced oil recovery. The government is giving, remember those dollar per ton numbers I gave you? The federal government is giving $130 to $180 a ton subsidy for direct air capture to see whether in fact that will work. Sequestration is something different. Sequestration is something where you're changing the way that CO2 is emitted, or you're actually sucking CO2 out of the air through plants or seaweed or a variety of things, and that you're then storing it in the earth. Ultimately, if we measure this accurately, we should be able to sit here and say, if it's a commodity, and you can measure the taking of CO2 out of the air and permanently sequestering it, it should just be like everything else. Like a barrel of oil this morning in West Texas Intermediate was $76 a barrel. Okay, that means you're not gonna be able to sell it for $80 and you're not gonna be able to buy it for $70. And that's where we're going in CO2 sequestration, but you've gotta have it be verified with a credible, the equivalent of, the SEC or Moody's or something.
Are you invested in any companies in that space? Are you doing that? Are you working on that?
Totally. Look, one of the things I said was, of the 6 big verticals, sequestration is one. And if you look at net zero by 2050, okay, we emit something like 42 gigatons a year. Net zero by 2050 implies we're not going to zero emissions. We're going to go down to hopefully 10 gigatons. Net zero means we're sequestering 10 gigatons a year. That's a huge industry that doesn't exist, that has to exist. And therefore, figuring out how to make that happen, Matt, is something that has infinite permutations.
What about, so we talked a little bit about fusion. What about traditional nuclear? Fission and microreactors, there's been some investment in that space.
We have been looking at this really closely. When you think about nuclear, if we can just try to, and it's not necessarily easy, take away all the emotion. Right. Thinking about nuclear is basically 3 things in my mind. Cost, safety, and what are you gonna do with the toxic leftovers? No one has really come up, just so you know, with an answer for the toxic leftovers, which are toxic for 100,000 years. So the answer was Yucca Mountain.
Yeah, what happened with Yucca Mountain? Isn't that the idea?
The people in Nevada were like, we're not taking your 100,000-year toxicity and sticking it in our water supply. Thank you very much. So the actual answer that people are using for nuclear waste is keep it where it is. Don't move it. Leave it where it is and we'll figure it out later. So when you look at all of the new fission nuclear stuff, they're trying to deal with all three of those things. Safety, which I think they're doing pretty well on. Cost, unclear, but if you look at the cost of what people have tried to do recently in the United States, very high. And they've done a lot of stuff to make the nuclear waste more pelletized, more containable, but no one's really understood what to do with those pellets for the next 100,000 years.
Can you recycle the waste and sort of reuse it again?
You can reduce it,
Yeah.
you can make it less, but there's no way to really solve that problem. And then you have to ask yourself, if that solves a bigger problem, are we then going to just put off the solution and do that? That's a real question for society.
So another question is, I think there's a kind of a criticism of the United States as a country that no longer builds things. And so, we don't build enough housing, we don't build enough roads. In the case of climate change, there's an argument that, again, we have the wind, we have solar, we have all of the solutions we need, but we don't have the transmission lines to get it from point A to point B. And there's arguments, if you're pro-nuclear, there's also a lot of regulation involved with that. How do we become a country that builds again? And it's more than just allocating money. There has to be some kind of political will. There has to be something else there.
Well, I think that, obviously everybody knows the acronym NIMBY, not in my backyard. And of course, in the United States, a lot of the things that we need as a society, people in Nantucket don't really want to look at the windmills off their veranda. And that's, an example of kind of what's going on. The ability to get permits in California for offshore wind, which pretty much has to happen, I think is 6 or 7 years. If you think that we have until 2030 to reduce CO2 by about 50%, giving up 6 or 7 years to get a permit, if you do the math on 2030 minus 2023, is kind of expensive. So there's a huge issue about that. There's a huge issue about being able to connect renewables to the grid. But let me address for 1 second the idea that the United States doesn't know how to make things anymore. I don't believe that. I mean, a lot about the IRA is to try to equilibrate American manufacturing costs to world costs and specifically Chinese costs. So that's a huge part so that in fact we will manufacture all kinds of things. Okay, we can discuss that for a long time, but let me say this too. There is great technological manufacturing improvement going on in the United States today. And I think, I'm looking at some companies, and I have some friends who've started companies where they're doing a completely disruptive way of doing manufacturing that I think can have a huge impact about where manufacturing is done, how much it costs, and really kind of the ability to do circular manufacturing so that every material used you can basically reduce it to dust and reuse it. So I think that we're going to see, for a whole bunch of reasons, a huge rebirth of manufacturing in the United States. The question is, do we have the people to do it? And that's a different question. A big part of the impact of the IRA is we're going to create millions or tens of millions of jobs. Okay, and who is going to take those jobs? Especially since a lot of them require a heck of a lot of training. That's a real question for our society too.
When you are looking at your investments, is there anything you say absolutely not? Hard pass?
Doesn't have positive climate impact, we absolutely won't do it. If you walked into our office and said, no question, this is 100 to 1, I won't even cast aspersions on any investment areas, but if we can't show in numbers a significant climate improvement, we won't make the investment, period, at the end.
You are also not just investing in companies, but also in real estate. How does that work? How are you evaluating real estate purchases with regard to climate?
So let me say this. I know I was moving fast and I apologize, but I said there's 6 big verticals. One of them is the built environment, what people do to heat and cool, the big HVAC systems in buildings. And one thing I'm pretty clear of, between now and 2050, we're not knocking down every building in the United States and rebuilding it. That is not going to happen. So what we're trying to show that you can make more money by taking a building and turning it to as close to net zero as possible that will increase your income, get you a higher multiple, and overall, it's a selfish, capitalistically sensitive thing to do. And if we can show that convincingly, and we're working our ass off to do it, then we think all of the real estate owners around the country can follow a template of how to do it, the things they need to do, the cheapest, fastest, best ways to do it, so that we can all green our buildings and deal with one of the 6 big verticals. And so a lot of this is, we want to be transparent about the things we come up with, because our goal is to have impact, and we understand that part of impact is substance, and part of impact is explanation and telling a story so people can all go, okay, I'm going to do that too, and I'm going to make more money because I'm a capitalist. That's our goal.
So that almost leads into my next question a little bit. For my entire adult life, we've known about climate change, and it's been a partisan issue in the United States, not everywhere else. How does it become a bipartisan or nonpartisan issue in the United States? Can that happen, and is that a major stumbling block to actually having meaningful reform?
Well, first of all, this is a global issue, so to all the Americans like me here, this is a global issue. We are important, but we're very, very far from the whole ballgame. And to be clear, the US is an emitter of 11% of the CO2 in the world. So if we cut that in half, we're at 5.5%. We are not saving the world by changing our behavior. As a country, though, one of the things I strongly believe is, this country was built to make big decisions and to push hard and to try and lead. So I believe we can have a much bigger impact than just the substance of reducing our own. And we cannot do that, not to be grandiose, but we cannot do that as a house divided. That cannot happen. This has to happen as an all-of-society move. And that means all the people, and that's why I'm trying to do this through capitalism. I'm trying to make the point, if you listen to me about real estate, you want to be smart in real estate and make more money, do this. We're trying to show in companies, you want to make more money, you want to grow faster, this is a huge tailwind at your back. If you don't do this, you're a dope. That's our point. And we don't think people are dopes. We think people are going to come around. We think all of these people are going to see their bottom line requires this. Now, do we need the government in here? Yes. Do we need the American people broadly in here? Yes. But the facts are on our side, and there's nobody in America who wants their kids and grandkids to suffer greatly. Nobody. So we can't have half the country fighting us. And I don't think they are. Look, if you look at the statistics in terms of registered Republicans, depending on how you ask the question, somewhere between 57 and 75% of registered Republicans want America to have a significant climate response. That is what we need in this country. We're not getting 100%. We need all of society to pitch in here, though, and to understand that we're on the same side.
We've got time for one more very quickly. Are you generally optimistic? Are we going to make it to 1.5? Are we going to make it to net zero by 2050?
I think if you talk to scientists and ask realistically, are we going to keep warming below 1.5 C? So first of all, no one in America knows what 1.5 C means anyway. Nobody. Second of all, no scientist thinks we're keeping it below 1.5 C. I think the odds are 50% that we go through that in the next 5 years. So the idea that we're going to meet the UN target that they made up one time in a measurement nobody in the United States understands, the real question to me is going to be this. At what point do we as a society decide that this is how we redefine who we are as a country, who we redefine kind of how we relate to each other and the government and the rest of the world, and how does the rest of the world decide? Because it's not just us who want our kids and grandkids to live in a safe, healthy world. So does everybody else. And so overcoming our divisions and actually understanding that this is a way to, our goal is to go to the rest of the world and say, it's cheaper to be clean. It's better business to be clean. It's in your interest. You're not doing us a favor. You're doing yourself a favor. And that's why I'm trying to do what I'm doing. Because that's, I believe, what capitalism does. It scales, it moves fast, it can become ubiquitous. And that's what we need. We need people around the world to say, it's common sense. We're never going to have copper wire in our phones, but we are going to have cell phones all over the world. That's what we need in climate.
And now, Congressman John Curtis, Constellation Energy CEO Diane Leopold, with Rich Powell of ClearPath.
All right. Well, I'm Rich Powell from ClearPath. For over 60 years, the Aspen Institute has been the nation's premier gathering place for leaders from around the globe across many disciplines to engage in deep discussions like this. And I am very excited about this particular discussion. Before I start, let me say a quick thank you to my good friends at the Aspen Institute Energy and Environment Program, particularly Greg Gershony, Kitty Pollack, and Tim Mason, for their continuous commitment to robust bipartisan engagement on climate and clean energy. Very important and somewhat unique at Aspen. Now, climate is obviously an enormous challenge, and I believe the two most important questions we have to answer about that, which we'll get into today, are first, how can we ensure that everyone has access to reliable and affordable energy while lowering emissions? And second, what are the public policies that we need to address that challenges that can pass in a divided government, which I understand we now have. We've got an expert on that here. Over the past 3 years, we've seen America's largest electric utilities, such as Dominion, Florida Power and Light here in Florida, Southern Company, Xcel, Duke Energy, PSEG, and others commit to reaching net zero emissions by 2050, enormous progress. And meanwhile, House Republicans have crafted a policy framework put forth by the Energy, Climate, and Conservation Task Force last summer as part of their commitment to America, which they're now planning to roll forward in the 118th Congress. It's an honor to be joined by two of the best people in America to help us unpack all of this. Diane Leopold is the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Dominion Energy. She's the senior executive responsible for all of the company's operating segments and related construction and, vitally, innovation functions. And Representative John Curtis is known for his reputation in the 3rd Utah Congressional District as somebody who gets things done. He founded the House Conservative Climate Caucus, which now has nearly 80 members, and is a leading voice in the Republican Party for pragmatic climate solutions. So please join me in a round of applause for the two fantastic leaders. So Congressman Curtis, let me start with you. Before we get into the policy questions, it feels like maybe a mistake was made. Your bio here says you're a Republican, and yet you're here at this big climate confab. You know I'm here with you. But is there an emerging trend that people should pay attention to here? Why is it that you're here?
Can we just enjoy this moment? Yeah. I'm a Republican, and I'm here to talk climate. I want you to know that at 4 o'clock this morning, I woke up in Provo, Utah. There was 4 inches of snow on the ground. And I have spent the day getting here because I want to, the most important message I could leave with you is that Republicans care deeply about the earth, about leaving it better for our children than we found it, I will grant you that we don't talk about it very well. We haven't figured out exactly how to do that. We're doing much better, but I want you to know this. I formed a group of Republican lawmakers in Congress. 80 Republicans have joined my conservative climate caucus. The first tenet of that caucus is that the climate's changing and man's had some influence on it. And now we want to tell you what we are going to do about it. And historically, all we've done is tell you what we don't like. And we're here to change that dialogue and tell you what our ideas are. And I believe we can have affordable, reliable, clean energy.
Diane, let me turn to you. You're running a large public power company, investor-owned utility. You've made some very significant commitments to clean energy, and I'd love for you to share more about those with the group. And you're also, your ratepayers like their energy clean, but they also like it all the time, and they like it affordably. And so, the congressman just laid out this dual commitment. How are you approaching delivering electricity clean, affordable, and reliable?
Sure. Well, thank you, and great to be here, everybody. So in many ways, at least for the United States, the power sector has really led the way in climate reductions. About 90% of the US's reduction in greenhouse gas has been because of the shift of the power industry since 2005. And when we first started talking about sustainability, and that word was kind of the new buzzword, a lot of people thought sustainability equals clean, and that's absolutely true. But there's really been a shift of understanding for exactly what you said, that we will not be successful in a sustainable future if it's not clean and reliable and affordable. So how that confluence comes together is really one of the key tasks that the industry has really been focused on. So we have certainly said that we would be net zero by 2050. Our main state where we have power is in Virginia, and there's actually a law to be carbon-free by 2045. Which is an incredibly significant task, especially when it comes to that affordability and reliability on top of it. But we were one of the first integrated electric and gas utilities that said that we would be net zero by 2050 in both carbon and methane. And then we went further a few years ago and said that we would also add in scope 3 emissions. So the carbon emissions that are generated by our suppliers upstream or our customers downstream in their usage. So very significant commitments. And when I look at that process of how do you ensure it's reliable and affordable as you're getting clean, there's no one easy answer to that. And so where I look that there are really 3 step changes that have to happen. The first one's already happened, which is how can we try to replace a lot of the coal-fired generation with lower emissions. So that coal to gas conversion happened about a decade ago. And just to give you an idea, our own carbon emissions in our company reduced by about 46% from that process alone, so roughly half. Now we are developing an enormous amount of solar and wind and battery. We have about 7,500 megawatts of solar in development. We are building the largest offshore wind farm in North America right now off the coast of Virginia. And we are in the early stages of putting in batteries, and the battery technology still has to develop, but so that's step 2. You have the coal to gas conversion, then you have the solar, wind, and batteries, and then there's still another step. That gets you maybe 80% of the way there to that net zero. And so it's innovation and it's technology that's going to allow that reliability, both grid technology as well as generation technology like green hydrogen, carbon capture, and advanced nuclear.
That's a lot.
It is.
That's a lot. So, Congressman, hearing all of that, enormous challenges. So they need to build an enormous amount of new stuff to replace the old stuff. And they need to innovate these new technologies. As you think about that, and you think about the debates that you're having, that you'll be having tomorrow when you head back for votes on the Energy and Commerce Committee. For those of you that don't know, that's kind of the everything committee that runs most of everything. What do you think are the policies that could help utilities like Dominion that are trying to meet these net zero commitments? What are the things that you're keyed in on that you think you could convince your Democratic colleagues to come along on in this agenda?
So one of my biggest regrets about Congress is that all of you see when we don't get along. And that makes the cable news and it makes social media. And I think you'd all be pleasantly surprised how much we actually get along and work well together. But if we're honest, that's boring and it doesn't make the news. And so there is actually more we agree on climate than what we disagree. And so let me just give you some specifics. I like to put things in 3 buckets. So the first bucket is renewables. Republicans are great with renewables. I think there may be a slight difference in how much we do with renewables, but Republicans are very supportive of renewables. The second bucket I would call emerging technologies. Republicans and Democrats are all behind fusion, all behind hydrogen, and some of these emerging technologies and batteries and things, and you'd find great consensus there. The third bucket, I think, is where you would find the disagreement to some degree, and that's fossil fuels and the role that fossil fuels play. Republicans, is a stereotype, like to point out how fossil fuels can be used to reduce emissions. I like to challenge my Democratic colleagues with this question. Do you hate emissions or do you hate fossil fuels? And a lot of them hate fossil fuels. But I think it's better to say we hate emissions. And so now let's talk about which fossil fuels are better to reduce emissions than others. And so there's really quite a bit that we actually do agree on. And I know we're going to touch on this. Maybe I'll segue into the next thing, which is permitting reform, which is there's a really wide open path right now in Congress for permitting reform.
Yeah. Well, so as you say it, every single one of those new projects, every one of them begins with a permit, right? And those permits are issued by the federal government, by state and local governments, by the intermediate power markets and things. And in many cases, those can stretch to a decade or more to complete. And so I wonder, Diane, I wonder if you have thoughts on what needs to be changed about the permitting process to actually enable, companies to go and build what they need to build to hit these ambitious targets.
Yeah, I'll give you a very simple answer is a clear path. There you go. You like that, don't you? Yeah, because, as you say, it can take years. And these are multi-billion-dollar commitments that have to be made by companies, and it's a lot of capital at risk. We want transparency. Nobody's looking to bypass the process. Everybody, wants to make sure that it's thorough, but you do want to have a path that it's going to take roughly this long, and at the end of it, if you do these things, you will be able to build.
Yeah, so certainty, some certainty to justify the enormous billion-dollar investments.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, given the conversation that just happened, I have to ask the congressman at least one more question. He knows something about public opinion amongst Republicans, and Mr. Steyer, who was just on stage, we noticed in the back, talked a little bit about public opinion around climate amongst Republican voters. How do you see that when you go back, when you're in your town halls, when you're talking to your voters? How do you see where they are on the issue?
So to give you some context, I represent a county that's called Carbon County. And I love to say to my colleagues back in Washington, what do you suppose they do in Carbon County? Yeah. And it won't surprise you that for decades and decades and decades, they have mined coal. They have a coal-fired plant there. And they're quite troubled by the climate dialogue because it threatens their livelihood. In redistricting, I picked up a new area. It's called the Uinta Basin, and they do oil and gas. And I went to introduce myself as a new member of Congress that would represent them. And their first response was, "Oh, wait a minute, you're the climate guy. This isn't going to work." And over a series of conversations with them, they actually gave me my highest percentage in re-election. And the reason why is I was able to convince them that I saw them as part of the solution, not the problem. And when we approach these communities, and instead of saying you're bad, you're evil, what you do is bad, and demonize them, instead of that, we say, look, you can be part of the solution. They're engaged. So I can literally go to a town hall meeting, and Tom before I said he could get like 75% depending upon how you ask the question. I can get 100% of the people depending upon how I ask the question. If I go to Carbon County and I say, how many of you want to leave the earth better than you found it? I will get 100%. Of course. I think we're born with this innate desire. And so the question is, how do we change the way we talk about this to bring these people with us instead of fight us?
I mean, so much of this is how we talk about the issue, focusing on emissions as opposed to fossil fuels, making sure that when we talk about clean, we talk about affordable and reliable right alongside it. Thinking just about the permitting reform debate, this is a place that the Aspen Institute has led significant research and dialogue. The Cleaner, Faster agenda was produced here at Aspen. Everyone should go and look up Aspen Cleaner, Faster. It's the most ambitious clean energy permitting reform agenda ever produced. It's very exciting. I hope it's
You had a lot to do with it.
What's that? It had something to do with it. Hope it's passed in law very soon. How do you think we talk about permitting? Obviously, this is an issue where Republicans are a light year ahead of many of your Democratic counterparts. And so how do you think we talk about this issue in DC in a way that's inclusive and gets us to a bipartisan consensus?
Well, I'll tell you, my Democratic colleagues are worried that when we say NEPA reform, that we want to undermine environmental standards. And you so eloquently said, you don't want to get around any standards, you just want predictability. And so if we can talk about, look, we're not going to touch environmental standards, but we do need to put predictability and speed into this. It's as hard to permit a wind farm, a solar farm, as it is a pipeline. Right, and so if we can get down, and the reality of it is every climate goal we have, every energy goal we have is being blocked by permitting reform. And that's how we need to talk with our Democratic colleagues about it, like how do we fix this? And I do know there's a number of them ready to talk about it.
It's exciting. Well, thank you both so much for the conversation, and thanks to the Institute and to all of you for coming too.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage the 43rd Mayor of the City of Miami, the Honorable Francis X. Suarez.
Hello, let's see if the mic works. Yes, it does. Good job, guys. Well, thank you. And I hope you've had of course, Miami Mayor, phone is ringing. It's a federal judge, by the way. I hope you had a productive day. This is day one of a multi-day seminar and ideas conference on how we deal with and grapple with some of the most challenging climatic problems. Here in Miami, as I'm sure you've heard, and I know that my good friend Mayor Gelber and also a good friend and colleague, Mayor Danilo Vincava, have been working together with the 30+ municipalities in our region to come up with solutions to the dramatic climatic issues that we see and that befall our city. We don't have the luxury of putting our head in the sand and pretending like these problems don't exist. We were impacted tremendously by Irma in 2017, where we saw a 4 to 6 foot storm surge, which inundated Brickell, our central business district, for 24 hours. And then, as if Mother Nature said, I can one-up myself, we saw the destructive nature of Ian and, of course, Dorian that sat on top of the Bahamas for 2 days with Category 5 winds, 20+ storm surge, a foot storm surge, and in Ian, we saw the destructive capacity in the Gulf Coast, anywhere from 10 to 15 foot storm surge. So Mother Nature has another level inside of her. And we have to understand that these kinds of issues not only impact our infrastructure and the decisions that we make, they're gonna impact the lives of our children. We have a brand that we call Miami Forever. Our residents did something very unusual. We decided to tax ourselves to deal with this problem. a couple of $100 million, which we hope to leverage with state and already leveraging at some level with state and of course the federal infrastructure bill to continue to be able to invest and make sure that Miami is in fact here forever. After Hurricane Andrew in 1992, we became one of the most wind resilient cities on the planet. Now our challenge, of course, is to become the most water resilient city on the planet. And we've seen how other cities across the world have dealt with water issues, some of which are actually below sea level and have been below sea level for a significant amount of time. And so we know that the challenges are conquerable. We know that we should be working together. And of course, our city, along with many others, has joined C40 and become one of over 1,000 cities that have pledged carbon neutrality. Thank you. We're also 8th in the nation in green jobs. And so we have a saying in Miami, the environment is the economy. No longer should we make those antagonistic forces, like you have to pick one or the other. It's either you're pro-environment or you're pro-economy. No, they should coexist. They should exist with each other. And we know that so much of our economy is tied to our existentialism, right? The fact that we need drinking water, right, is something that unfortunately is not gonna change, right? We're always gonna need drinking water, and therefore we have to protect the assets that provide that for us. The fact that we have this incredible bay that you can scuba dive and see and enjoy and sail, 12 months out of the year. I mean, that's something that creates a tremendous amount of ecotourism, but it also is something that we need to preserve and protect. And so we have stark examples of why the environment is the economy and vice versa. And so I just want to welcome you all. I want to thank you all for being so attentive. I hope you help us tackle some of these issues. I've seen some incredibly innovative things, from container ships that change the pH of the water to be able to extract and absorb more carbon, to a variety of other very, very innovative solutions to some of our climate issues. And so this is what it's about. We're here to listen, we're here to learn, we're here to collaborate with each other. And so I thank you again. Just a little housekeeping. There is a reception at the Botanical Gardens. It has just started, and so I invite you all after this to please enjoy yourself. Thank you so much and have a great conference. Thank you.
Please use the hashtag Aspen Ideas Climate on social media. Please join us right now for a reception at the Miami Beach Botanical Garden.